Yeah, well, I was in the gym today watching some guy do these like one-legged squats on a half of these bozo bolt or whatever those things are called. And I'm like, okay, the time maybe if the guy was like a world-class like hockey player, maybe there's a
Like
place
a
for that.
downhill skier or something like
Yeah, but he was
that.
like a 35% body fat at best. And, I'm thinking this guy, and he was working out with a personal trainer. So anyway, that's another tangent I could get off on. But the way this came about was I ended up injuring my C6 vertebrae a few years ago and lost the use of my left arm for 18 months. And I was reaching out to old friends of mine. I called Lee Labrada and Samir Benanout and Lee Haney and Steve Holman, and editor-in-chief of Iron Man, and Doug Brindoli, who was a former Mr. Universe. And they were all my age, and I knew they were all in good shape. So I wanted to kind of see what they were doing.
Right.
And basically, what they were doing is doing what we were doing in the 70s and early 80s, which were a little bit light, moderate weight, and lightweight, moderate weight is it depends on the person,
It's a relative, yeah, it's a
Yeah, it's
relative.
very relative. Lightweight for a Lee Haney might be a heavyweight for me.
Right.
But they were all basically training the same way: moderate weight, shorter rest time between sets. They all look phenomenal, and it's the same way that Lou Ferrigno trained in the '80s and still trains. It was the way Arnold Schwarzenegger trained in the movie Pumping Iron.
Right.
It was the way all those guys trained back then. And originally, I wanted to call this product Back to the Future Fitness, but I didn't want to get any trademark problems with the Back to the Future people. So I decided to call it Old School New Body. And the way I got involved with Steve was he was one of the guys I was reaching out to.
Yeah.
And he's editor-in-chief of a magazine, and he was helping me with this. And the funny thing is he was going through the same problems I was, knee problems, lower back problems, and things like that. So what he had done, he had started researching some of this stuff about a year and a half, 2 years earlier. And in the warehouse of the Iron Man magazine, do you remember Vince Gironda?
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
He's
Well,
one of the sharpest guys of all time, I think.
he's nuts. He was a nut, too, but he was sharp. And he was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
But what happened was he was getting ready to retire, and him and his wife put all of his old writings and boxes and stuff and stored them in the Iron Man warehouse. Then Vince passed away, and I guess the wife left it to Iron Man. So all of these boxes of Vince's old writings were all there. So Steve, a couple of years earlier, had started going through this, and he started experimenting with some of the continuous tension type exercise, shorter rests in between sets, shorter, lowering the weight slower, things like that. And he was having a great result with it. So then he told me, he goes, "Why don't you try this?" So it was real similar to like I said, what Lee Haney and everybody else was doing, Lee Labrada.
Right.
And just kind of, Steve and I kind of tweaked it a little bit. And then I said, you know what? I said, people need to know about this. And I was just going to write a book and put it out there. But at the same time, I was meeting a lot of these people in the internet marketing spaces, guys like Joel Marion and Mike Geary and John Benson.
Sure.
And a lot of these people I'd become friends with. And they were kind of trying to talk me into doing an internet product. So I told Steve, I said, let's try putting an internet product together. And the result was phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. So you guys are reaching a lot of people with that. Well, that's fantastic. I like the old school bodybuilding approach in a lot of ways, because what I see happening with a lot of this new school stuff is either one, they're trying to do functional training and they're doing it bad, like you just talked about, and it just makes no damn sense in the world. Or they're trying to be bodybuilders, but they're following the programs of these guys who are using chemical warfare all day long, and they're not getting any results from it, right?
Yeah. And also, you got to keep in mind, the magazines need to have something to print every month. So what you're reading in the magazines is not necessarily the truth. Or it may be the truth for this particular guy that he tried once.
Right.
So I'm not saying they're necessarily lying, but they may be taking this extreme workout that this guy is doing. I got to tell you, I've been around with there's two ways bodybuilders train. One is the way I'm talking about, and the other one is the way Dorian Yates and Mike Menzer have done, where it was really hardcore, very, very heavy weights and things like that. And doing that is okay, but you get injured. And I worked out that way for a long time, starting in the early '80s. And I got to be very friendly with Dorian Yates, and Mike Menzer was a really good friend of mine. I did train like that. Did I get results? Absolutely got results.
Yeah.
But as I aged, my body paid the price for it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's powerful, because why do we all take up exercise? It's to feel better, to look better, to perform better. It's not to wake up one day when you're 50 years old and limp down the road because you decided that you wanted to squat 400 pounds. You know what I mean?
It's exactly right. And funny, when I turned 50 is when I had the problems with my C6 vertebrae.
Yeah.
My lower back was hurting me, my shoulders hurt, my knees hurt, my elbows hurt. In fact, I had this pain in my left elbow for probably 4 or 5 years previous to that. And since then, I'm 53 now. I have very little. I do have some joint problems because of the car accident I had. But other than that, I have very little joint problems. And in fact, I would probably be crippled from arthritis because of this car accident. In fact, the doctors told me, once they told me I was going to live, and then once they realized that I was going to walk and be able to function as a human being, they told me I never would, but I did. They told me, hey, you're going to have severe, debilitating arthritis by the time you hit 40. Well, I'm 53, and I feel better than I did when I was 20.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for this.
Good for you, man. Well, so I got a lot of listeners on the call who are really into the functional training movement, and I preach real functional training where we're actually learning how to move our bodies well. But one thing that I really think is missing from a lot of people who do the functional stuff like the CrossFits and the gymnastics stuff is that they're not spending enough time focusing on their muscles. Like that muscle control was a secret of not just the old-time bodybuilders in the 80s, but way back into the early 1900s, the late 1800s even. And so where do you kind of equate the benefits of just that slow, controlled, isolated movements in relationship to like a functional training regimen?
You know, functional training has different meanings to different people.
Sure, it does.
To me, I'm an athlete. You know, I was a runner, and you know, I also played other sports. And the decathlon is what I was a pole vaulter as well as doing the 400 and 800 meters. I wanted to do the decathlon, which I did. So functional training to me means, I think if you got certified as a personal trainer, they would call it specificity of training. So if you're training a certain way, you know, what's the purpose? If you're training to be a professional hockey player, you're going to train differently than if you're trying to be if you're an Olympic gymnast. I think what people today do is they take some of this wacky stuff and they put it into a program and they start doing it. And you and I see it in the gym all the time. You know, doing weird exercises on balls or throwing things around, and there's no function for that, in my opinion. There are good functional training programs out there, though, that are phenomenal. Yeah. You know, I see people doing it in the gym. I see older people doing it in the gym, where you're moving your body in a specific way, but it's for a purpose.
Right.
And you know, taking a 80-pound kettlebell and throwing it over your head, if you're 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, you have a big fat belly, you have zero ab muscles. That's a recipe for disaster.
Right.
But if you're, in my opinion, and I might be wrong, I know some people do get in shape with these things. Your body is designed to work in a certain manner. So if you're utilizing your muscles with the way your muscles are created to move, whether you're doing it in a functional fitness fashion or with straight dumbbells and barbells, you're going to get in shape and you're going to be successful. Yeah. Tell me what in order for me to answer that question, what is your definition of functional training?